Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today, welcome to the second episode of the 21st Century Leadership Challenges series, where we'll speak about the health and social emergency. And the last month we had was about the climate emergency. And we have with us Dr. Ravi Fernando. He's on 8 multinational and local boards. He's an alumni of the University of Cambridge and INSEAD Business School. Having completed all his sustainability studies, postgraduate and masters at Cambridge and all his strategy studies at INSEAD Business School. He's a visiting faculty in INSEAD Business School and is an executive in residence there. Dr. Fernando created the 21st Century Board Leadership Model, which was developed in June 2020, and a US copyright was secured. It was converted into a masterclass that is now taught in Luxembourg, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Sri Lanka, soon to be launched in Malaysia, Vietnam, and India in 2022. So we'll go into our topic today, the health and social emergency. And yes, Dr. Fernando, could you tell me who is a 21st century leader?
A very good morning, Michael. I'm very happy to do our second session, monthly session. I think we did our first session in September on the first Saturday, and now here we are doing our second session in October. So as the subject is 21st century leadership, the first key point I want to make today is, so what sets a 21st century leader apart from non-21st century leaders? Okay, what is the thing that differentiates the two? And just before I tell you what it is, let me first tell you what it is and also then tell you something about today's status of leadership in the world. Okay, so what are the 4 big characteristics as per the 21st Century Board Leadership Model Masterclass that I have created in 2020 June, as you very rightly pointed out, with the US copyright. So the first characteristic of a 21st century leader is that he or she will be science-led and respects science and mobilizes science to address the world's sustainability challenges or 21st century challenges. So what do I mean by science-led? What I mean by science-led is, whenever a decision is being taken for the business or for the country or for anything that matter, you will understand the implications of that decision from a scientific point of view. Now, to do that, you don't have to be a scientist. You have to only have some common sense. So what do I mean by common sense science? All of us at some stage in our life have gone to a science class in our school. It might have been at grade 5, it might have been at grade 6, but we learned the basics of science. What is gravity? What is the impact of heating? What are the impacts of air pollution? And we learn these basic stories, and one of the tests we all do in our science classes, we take maybe a cube of ice and heat it, and we see how the cube of ice melts into water. Now, when I talk about science-led leadership, I'm talking about leaders remembering those simple messages, because to be very honest, 99% of the world's leaders and maybe 98% of the world's business leaders have ignored the basic science. And that is a very, very serious problem. Okay? If anyone ignores basic science, we have a serious problem. Okay? So that is the first key point I want to make. That is the first key point I want to make to you. Okay? Right. Now, so science-led is the basis. And every business leader and every national leader or any leader of anything in the world, even to lead your home in your own household, You have to be someone who respects and leads from a science knowledge. Okay. You can't ignore science. Okay. So that's the first one. The moment you have a science-led leader in the 21st century, you will also realize immediately what the science is telling us about the climate emergency and the code red for humanity, as the UN Secretary General calls it. And also they will realize that we are now facing a catastrophic climate emergency in the world. If you don't respect science, you won't even know what they're talking about. That is why, for you to have the second characteristic of a 21st century leader, you must have the first one. If you are not science-led, you will not respond with urgency to impact the climate emergency, and what the Secretary General of the UN is now calling it, the code red for humanity. So when you think of the first two characteristics of a science of a 21st century leader, both have a connection to science. What is science? Basis of science, basics of science, Science 101, and what are the world scientists telling us about what is happening on the planet today. So you will not react to it in the second stage if you don't know what it is in the first stage. So I want to categorically say that majority of the world's leaders today, both national leaders and business leaders, are absolutely ignoring the basics of science. That is why they are behaving the way they are behaving, by ignoring the climate emergency and ignoring the code red for humanity. Because if they understood Science 101, they will have an urgency to impact the climate emergency. Mm-hmm. So that is the first two characteristics of a 21st century leader. Number three, a 21st century leader will have what I call a triple bottom line mindset. Now, what is the meaning of a triple bottom line mindset? So triple bottom line basically is a concept that was mooted by a British economist called John Elkington in 1997, when he wrote a book called Cannibals with Forks. And in it, basically what he said was that whenever a decision is taken, every leader must think of it from a triple bottom line point of view. Now, what is the meaning of that? So the first triple bottom line that most business leaders and economists and national leaders remember is profit. So how do we generate profit? How do we make a profit out of the country, of the business? And how do we make sure the country's economy is growing so that we have an income to the country? So we call that economic issues, and we call it profit-related issues. Now, having a profit-related mindset, there's nothing wrong with having a profit-related mindset. And I think no business or nation can run at a loss, because if all you're doing is running at a loss, that country will be begging and borrowing money, and the business will have to close down. So making a profit is essential. It's a bit like the lifeblood of any business or a nation, because that profit can be then used to develop a country, if it's a country, in terms of national economics, or that profit can be used to innovate and do good things for a business. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with profit and profitability and growth. However, the triple bottom line mindset leader says, I must make a profit, I must go for economic growth, but number two is, I must not harm the environment or the planet when I achieve that objective. Now, that is the most important element of a triple bottom line mindset leader, because they will realize they cannot destroy the environment and make a profit. They cannot be culpable of not regenerating what they destroyed and making a profit. So it is not profit at any cost. It is profit taking into consideration the term planet. Planet is to do with the environment. And I can tell you almost 99.9% of the world's leaders, including Bolsonaro of Brazil, is a good example of a leader who is destroying the planet, destroying the environment in the hope of making economic growth. And he clearly, therefore, is not a triple bottom line 21st century leader. So I'm giving you, because today on BBC News, there is a special session today, the 2nd of October, on BBC News. There's a special documentary on the destruction of the Amazon and how that will impact the health of people in the world. Because for many, many centuries, 20% of the world's oxygen all came from the Amazon rainforest. From 20% of the oxygen of the world, today we are 0% of oxygen from the Amazon. Why? Because of one leader who is a 19th century single bottom line leader who wants to make a profit at any cost, and he has harmed the environment more than any other leader in history in terms of the Amazon rainforest, which we used to call the earth lung. The earth lung. Okay, so triple bottom line leaders will have a business model or a national growth model which achieves profitability, that achieves growth, but protecting the environment, regenerating the environment, and being sensitive to the planet. Now we have two elements of the triple bottom line. The third and final element of the triple bottom line is a 21st century leader who understands triple bottom line will also make sure that their profit model or growth model encourages social progress of all human beings and all humanity. So there will be no inequality. If there is inequality, that means some people are benefiting from the business model or the growth model. Majority are not benefiting from the growth model. And that is called not a triple bottom line leader. And that is the inequality that we are facing in the world today, where 1% of the world's 7.9 billion people own and control 52% of the world's assets and wealth. That means 99% are sharing the 48%. And if you look at the last 10% in the world's economy, the poorest 10%, they have only 0.2% of the world's wealth. So that is a serious problem to do with lack of social progress and lack of social equality. So that is, to me, the third element of a triple bottom line mindset leader and the third element of a 21st century leader. The last and final element of a 21st century leader is a 21st century leader will understand the 21st century board leadership model and embed the model's challenges in the board agenda and in the national growth agenda. Because if those elements are not even in the agenda, how will you even discuss them and start attacking the problems? So what has happened in the world today is majority of the boards in the world, and I can tell you from the boards I sit in, the 21st century board leadership model issues of the three emergencies of climate emergency, social and health emergency, health and economic emergency are not on the agenda of most of 99% of the boards in the world. These three emergencies are sometimes in the national growth agenda, but people are not understanding the seriousness of the climate emergency yet. Okay? And the 21st century board leadership model that I have created has three emergencies and three disruptors. The three emergencies I just mentioned, but there are also three disruptors to the global economy. What are the three? Technological disruption, geopolitical disruption, and governance disruption. Now, a 21st century leader, the final element is those 6 elements, the 3 emergencies and the 3 disruptors, will be in the board agenda as key elements of the board agenda, and they will also be in any national growth agenda from a national point of view. So, in summary, I have now explained to you who is a 21st century leader. In summary, a leader who is science-led and mobilizes science to meet the challenges. Number 2, a leader as a result of science-led has an urgency to impact the climate emergency and coordinate for humanity. Right? Urgency. That means you're not going to say, we'll put the house that is on fire, which is the planet, off in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. You will try to do it today. If not today, you'll try to put it off tomorrow. If your house is on fire, you're not going to call the fire engine 10 years from now. You're not going to call the firefighters to put the fire off 20 years from now. Actually, majority of the world's leaders are like that. Our house is on fire. They're saying they will put the fire off in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, and I call them 19th century science ignoring leaders who don't really care because they don't understand the science. Okay? The third category is that they understand triple bottom line thinking and put planet and people before profit. Planet and people before profit. Lastly, they will look at the 21st century board leadership model, which has six elements, the 3 emergencies at the top and the 3 disruptors at the bottom, and build them into the board agenda and give it the priority, attention, and action it requires. So that is the answer to your first question. And maybe you might ask the question, are there people like that in the world? Are there leaders like that in the world? So I'm going to give you the names of about 10 people who will fit all those 4 categories, all those 4 criteria. Number 1 in my list is Elon Musk, who leads Tesla. Respects science, understands science, triple bottom line guy, and has embedded the 21st century leadership model in his business strategy. The Sundar Pichai of Google, a very good example of a 21st century leader who has really started reshaping Google, who is already 100% driven by renewable energy for all its businesses, and just launched a new program called 24/7, which means they are hoping to be 100% climate emergency and carbon positive by 2030, which is just around the corner, and they are making amazing progress. The third guy is it's a guy called Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia. He's the founder of Patagonia Clothing, an amazing leader who has decided that the main strategy in his clothing business model is to repair and re-innovate all the clothing he's selling and all the equipment he's selling. He doesn't like to sell new things. He even tells them, don't buy new clothes. Give me the old clothes you bought from me. I will repair it and give it back to you looking like new. So he is a guy who has 40,000 repair stations in the world. His business model is repair and reuse. So what an amazing leader of Patagonia. The fourth guy is a guy called Henrik Poulsen of Denmark. Henrik Poulsen was the CEO of a company called Danish Oil and Gas, and that was contributing 90% of the fossil fuels in Denmark. Mm-hmm. When he took over the company, he converted the Danish oil and gas company to a company called Ørsted in 2009, just 11 years back, from the number 1 oil and gas company in Denmark to be the number 1 wind power renewable energy company in the world. So, amazing story of a leader who understands science, who understands the climate emergency, and said, my company cannot be a part of the problem. My company is going to be a part of the solution, right? So if Danish oil and gas's leader can turn the company from an oil and gas company to be an energy company in renewable energy, in wind power. Every oil and gas company, whether you're the biggest polluter from Saudi Aramco to ExxonMobil, to Shell, to BP, to Total, to Elf Aquitaine, they have to all take this young man's leadership and ask the question, we can yet be in the energy business, but we should be in the renewable energy business. So a wonderful example of a 21st century leader. The next leader is a man called Werner Hoyer. Werner Hoyer is the head of the European Investment Bank, which is bigger than the World Bank and IMF combined. Werner Hoyer completely changed the game for EIB and today has banned putting €1 into any fossil fuel project. What an amazing leadership strategy and a lesson for all the banks of the world, for all the finance institutions of the world. We will not put $1 or €1 to anything to do with the fossil fuel industry, right? Today, when I look at the fossil fuel industry, the top 10 banks which are funding them are JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citibank, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Sumitomo Bank, Deutsche Bank, Mitsubishi Bank, Royal Bank of Canada. Shame on these banks, because this man has shown that you can be the number one and the biggest financial institution in the world and stop fossil fuel investment and yet make amazing business profitability. Okay. Then the last three are ladies. And one of the ladies that are impressing me today is the head of the European Union, a lady called Ursula von der Leyen. And she's the new head of the European Union. And when she came into power, she launched the European Green Deal, which is to make Europe the first continent in the world to be carbon negative in the next 7 to 8 years. So amazing leadership. She's trying to cut down all emissions in Europe by about 50 to 60%. So great leadership. Then New Zealand's leader, Jacinda Ardern, of course, has a lot of work to do in terms of climate emergency, but I can see she managed the health and social emergency very well. But she has to learn what it is to be a climate emergency managing national leader. Lastly, the leader of a bank in Spain, which is Europe's now one of the big banks, among the top three, a bank called Santander, and a lady's name is Anne Botín. And for the last 10 years, Santander Bank is known as the most sustainable bank in the world. So are there people who put science first, who have an urgency for the climate emergency, who have a triple bottom line mindset, and who embed the 21st century board leadership model in their board agenda and national agenda? Yes, I have just given you the names of almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 leaders in the world who are doing that. And what we are telling all the world's leaders through this course, which is probably the only course in the world today that is trying to build 21st century national leaders and board leaders. All these other courses, all over the world, I can tell you, don't cover the subject in the comprehensive manner we do. Okay? So this is the start of today's session. And back to you. I hope you have now understood what it is to be a 21st century leader. And I hope I have inspired you also to think 21st century leadership in the future.
Very interesting insights, Dr. Fernando. Thank you for that. And could you let us know the air pollution and the health connection?
Okay, so now we are going into our second topic in our series, 21st century challenges. At the last session in September, I talked about the climate emergency. And I also told you that for 34 years, world leaders have ignored it, ignored the science, ignored the science. And today we are facing a code red for humanity. And by 2025, when we cross plus 1.5 degrees centigrade, we will have a catastrophic global economic meltdown. to the tune of between 54 and 67 trillion dollars in a global economy that is 90 trillion dollars due to extreme weather events and a whole host of issues. Today, we are going to move from climate emergency to the health and social emergency. The first thing I want to mention about this is to tell you that there is no economic emergency that happens on its own. Number one, every economic emergency happens because we ignore the climate emergency and we ignore the health and social emergency. So a simple mathematical formula is if we add climate emergency plus health and social emergency equals the economic emergency. Okay? You don't have a problem with profits and growth if you are not ignoring the climate emergency and the health and social emergency. So people are trying to fix the economic emergency without addressing the climate emergency and the health and social emergency, and they fail miserably because they are not understanding the cause of the economic emergency. They are trying to treat the effect of the economic emergency, forgetting the cause. Okay? So that is the first key point I want to make as we go into health and social emergency. And our next session will be on the economic emergency. Okay? So the question you asked me is, what is the connection between air pollution and health? Okay? So the first thing I want to tell you is that the earth has two lungs. Two lungs. We have the green lung, which is our forests like the Amazon, the Congo, and all our great forests, rainforests of the world, Borneo. And then we have the ocean lung, the blue lung. So we have a green lung and we have a blue lung. Now, let me tell you that the world's leaders in the last 34 years have almost ignored both these lungs and ruined them and destroyed them in a manner that is unbelievable. We have polluted the oceans, we have released all our toxic waste to the oceans, and we have destroyed our forests. And like I told you, Brazil, led by a 19th century science ignoring, climate emergency ignoring, Code Red for Humanity ignoring leader, who is now referred to as Bolsonaro Chainsaw, because he's using all the chainsaws to cut down the Brazilian Amazon in the name of economic growth. But in the process, the earth lung, the green earth lung, which was giving us 20% of the world's oxygen, has been completely devastated. So much so that today we don't get 1% of oxygen from the Amazon rainforest. Just imagine one wrong leader in any country can devastate the lives and health of 7.9 billion people in the world. One wrong leader. And we have seen many wrong leaders in the last couple of years, including the American leader, Donald Trump, and including many of the leaders of the world today. Okay? So now, let's talk a little about the air pollution. So how does air pollution happen? So air pollution happens when we burn polluting fossil fuels for our transportation and for energy. And for whatever reason, if you burn fossil fuels, that will leave a whole amount of air pollution in the air. So the most polluting fossil fuel in the world is coal. So when there is coal when burned for transportation in the old days for trains and machines, from 1880 we have been burning coal. And sadly, even in 2021, countries like Australia, Poland, China, to a certain extent, Canada, even countries like America, yet burn between 30 and 40% coal for their energy use, which is showing that they are yet in the 18th or 19th century in terms of leadership, in terms of renewable energy. So coal is the most polluting fossil fuel. It contributes nearly 1,230 times the pollution of solar power. 1,230 times the pollution of solar power. and contributes 820 tons of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases for every ton of coal that you burn, and is globally the biggest cause of the energy pollution in the world. Right. So second biggest pollutant is oil, petroleum, diesel, petrol, whatever you call it. Okay. So when you look at petroleum, that causes about 18.4 deaths a ton and is 262 times higher than nuclear energy even, right, in terms of pollution, and massively contributes 720 tons of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere for every ton of oil that they burn. So when we get into a diesel vehicle, when we get into a diesel bus, when we get into a diesel van, when we get into anything powered by petrol or diesel, directly we are contributing to the air pollution of the world. And that is something I want you to understand, because every one of us can take a decision to either go in a hybrid vehicle or go in an electric vehicle instead of traveling in a vehicle that is powered by diesel. And the government leaders have to then convert all the public transport into renewable energy driven, from hybrids to electrics, instead of persisting with polluting diesel vehicles. Okay, and many countries are doing that as we speak. So coal and oil contribute jointly about 60% of the world's air pollution problems, and also contribute 60% of the fossil fuels, between 820 tons per ton in coal and 720 tons. And these two together are 60% of the world's problems. So if the world wants to solve its global warming problem, air pollution problem, they have to take these two things off the market. That's the only way we are going to achieve this. And they have to leave these things at the ground below the surface and not use them anymore. Because if we keep digging and for more oil and digging for more coal and burn it, we are going to destroy ourselves in the process. Okay? So what is the third most polluting fossil fuel? Natural gas is the third most polluting thing. So there's a big difference between coal, oil, and natural gas. Natural gas contributes 490 tons of carbon dioxide to the Earth's atmosphere for every ton they burn, and of course contributes 2.8 deaths. I said coal contributes 24.6 deaths, oil contributes 18.4 deaths, and natural gas 2.4. So natural gas is a better thing than burning coal and petroleum. And maybe that may be the first thing to do for all the countries. Move to natural gas as opposed to staying with coal and petroleum. Then the fourth element in terms of contributing to pollution is biomass. So we burn a lot of biomass in some countries like Brazil, where they are burning a lot of sugarcane and to generate energy. So that is also considered a fossil fuel for a non-renewable energy, because what you do, you destroy the forests of the world in the name of biomass, and that is not a good strategy either. So what are the renewable energies we can use? The renewable energies we can use by getting out of the fossil fuels is hydropower, which only contributes 30 tons of greenhouse gases compared to 820 tons, 720 tons, 490 tons, and 230 tons of the other four elements of coal, oil, natural gas, and biomass. The next one is nuclear energy. Now, I want to tell you, I believe in nuclear energy. And France has believed in nuclear energy all these nearly 50, 60 years. And they have not had accidents like in Japan, where the Fukushima plant was destroyed. And no accidents like Russia had. when they had that famous Chernobyl nuclear plant getting destroyed. So what it tells me is both Russia and Japan did not manage their nuclear energy problem properly, because if they managed it, we won't be looking at nuclear energy the way we are looking at it now. Okay? Nuclear energy is a clean energy and contributes only 3 tons of fossil fuels and greenhouse gases to the planet, and almost 31 tons, even less than hydroelectricity. So it's a very clean energy, and I believe the world needs to expand nuclear energy, but have the controls, have the amazing leadership that manages this in a way like the French have done it for 50, 60 years with no accidents. Okay? The third renewable energy is wind energy. And wind energy is almost equal to nuclear energy in terms of the renewable energy cycle. And mismanage the nuclear energy. The final renewable energy that is good for the planet is solar energy. And solar energy is the cleanest energy we can go with, and contributes about 3 to 4 tons of greenhouse gases compared to 800, 700, 600, 400 tons in the 4 fossil fuels. So the first point I want you to understand is the solution to the air pollution is to exit polluting fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, natural gas, and biomass. But I'm also telling you that it is better to go to natural gas and stop fossil fuels of coal and petroleum if you need to, because that is better than continuing with fossil fuels like coal and natural oil. So as an intermediary, you can even go to natural gas. Okay? It's better than staying with coal. So in the 21st century, any world leader or any business leader who gets his electricity and energy coming from coal and oil is basically what I would like to call them 19th century science ignoring leaders. 19th century science ignoring leaders. And you don't have to be very smart. For whether it is China, whether it is Poland, whether it is Australia, whether it's Canada, even England and India, even to a certain extent America, all these countries yet have about 30-40% of their energy, even in Europe, coming from polluting coal power. And that to me is confirmation that majority of these leaders are not science-led leaders, but are ignoring the science, because what I just showed you is knowledge available to everyone. And how is it that they are ignoring the science? Okay, right. So now let me tell you something more about air pollution. 36% of cancer, lung cancers, 34% of deaths from stroke, 27% of death from heart disease is caused due to the particulation of air pollution from fossil fuels. 36% of deaths of lung cancer, 34% of deaths from stroke, and 27% of deaths of heart disease come from the particles in the air. We call it particle size of 2.5 microns in terms of the particles of lead and poisonous gases which come from burning petroleum, diesel, and coal. When those things are in the air and we breathe it, that is how we end up with this invisible killer called air pollution. So if you want to stop cancers, if you want to stop strokes and stop heart diseases, one way to do that is to stop burning coal and fossil fuels like petroleum. Can you see? There's a connection between the health emergency and the air pollution and burning of fossil fuels. So when a leader says, I want to continue with fossil fuel burning like coal and petroleum and diesel, what he's saying is, I don't care if so many people die of cancer, stroke, or heart disease. That means they are 18th, 19th century leaders. And these figures I'm giving you is from the World Health Organization. So let me tell you another story in terms of this. Every year, air pollution kills 7 million to 10 million people in the world, right? Now, directly or indirectly, that is the figure from the WHO, right? And the majority of these deaths are happening, as you guessed it, in countries which have coal power and diesel power powering their transport and their energy. So most of South Asia and Southeast Asia and a good part of China, which is about 40% coal power, majority of those 7 million deaths, 7 to 10 million deaths, over 2 to 3 million deaths are happening in those countries I mentioned to you, including Australia. Okay. Now I can tell you in Africa it's about 1 million deaths. In some of the other regions it is under 500,000 deaths, and of course the South America, because of the famous Brazilian earth lung, Amazon used to have the lowest number of deaths from air pollution because it had the Amazon, and it was only about 300,000 deaths per annum. But don't forget, Brazil's earth lung has been destroyed by Bolsonaro chainsaw of Brazil. And now I can be 100% sure the next time I see these health figures, the Latin America will no longer be the cleanest area. North America will no longer be the cleanest area. And I can tell you, it's a matter of time before these deaths increase in those regions. Okay? So, air pollution is a major, major crisis. And one of the things that we need to also understand is one of the ways to control air pollution is to have a lot of trees, have forests, because the forest will absorb the toxic air pollution that is in those areas. Yeah. And if air pollution affects that, then one way to sort this out is to increase our forest cover. But what is the world doing? We are decreasing our forest cover. We are deforesting the forest. And we have, as at now, deforested 72 to 78% of the world's forests, which means we are only left with about 28% of forest cover, which means we have taken out the one thing that could have given us air conditioning, which is forests and trees, because the trees absorb the carbon dioxide and give you oxygen instead. So if you cut the trees, there's nothing to absorb the carbon dioxide except us. And we will absorb the carbon dioxide and we will then fall in. Okay? So understand that very important point in terms of the forest cover connection to health and health emergency. So the world last 2 years have devastated 4 million kilometers of forest fire is being 4 million square kilometers or hectares are being destroyed every year with forest fires. 4 million. And wildfires are on the rise as the planet gets hotter and hotter. And I think in the last class I talked about, last session, I said that 20% that in the last 20 years, we have the hottest 20 years. That means heat has also come in, and then it leads to forest fires and wildfires. So in Greece, we had about 500 fires that burned 125,000 hectares. In Turkey, we have had the worst wildfires. In California, we have burned twice the size of New York City in the last 1 year. In Algeria, we have had forest fires. In Australia, we have had the worst forest fires in its history ever. And nearly 3 billion animals died due to the forest fires in Australia. So in Siberia, as we talk today, there are forest fires happening. And even as we watch, forest fires are beginning to attack the Siberian forests, burning right now. California is burning right now. And Australia has burned to the ground most of their forests, and so is California. So why is all this happening? And of course, the worst story is in Brazil, where as at today, there are about 70,000 forest fires happening as we speak. 70,000. And I told you, they have released about 1.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And this is Brazil not only destroying Latin America, Brazil, by burning forests, have destroyed Latin America and the world in terms of its earth lung. And Australian bushfires, I just told you about Australian bushfires, destroyed 12.6 million hectare acres in the last 2 to 3 years and ended up affecting 11.3 million people, and 3 billion animals were impacted. 1 billion of them were killed. Now, what is the common factor about Australia, Brazil, and Russia and Siberia? All three of them have leaders who are ignoring science. All three of them have leaders who are not bothered about the climate emergency. All three of them have leaders who don't understand the code red for humanity. They are Brazil's Bolsonaro, Australia's Morrison, Steve Morrison, and in Russia we have Putin. So unfortunately, these leaders have contributed to the problem, not solved the problem. Now you know why I'm saying we need 21st century leaders in every country. Because if you end up putting the wrong leader like we did in America, then they will contribute to the problem, not get us out of the problem. Okay? So I hope I have now given you a very good analysis of the connection between air pollution and health crisis, deforestation, and the contributing to the air pollution problem. But deforestation is contributing more than air pollution. Deforestation is now contributing to what I call, in the last 10 years, a rise in health pandemics. So that is a very important point to understand. If you keep destroying your nature, you will end up with air pollution, and air pollution will kill you. And if you keep destroying nature, you will also create what I call the pandemics of health. So let's look at some of the recent pandemics. SARS came to us from the whole story of pigs, and SARS was transmitted from the pigs in the world. Then we have Ebola virus. Ebola came as a result of destroying the habitats of bats in the forests of Congo, etc. And then we started killing those bats easily because they have no place to hide. And then we start trying to eat those bats and make bat soup. And then what happens? The blood from those bats come into us as we do that, and then we have another virus. In Middle East, there was a virus called MERS, which came from camels. And all of us in the world now knows COVID-19 came to us from destruction of bats environments in Southeast Asia and the wet markets of China, Korea, Vietnam, etc. So now what I have shown you is there's a connection between deforestation and the health emergency of the world. So what is the level of deforestation we are having? In North America, we have deforested 33% of our forest cover. In Latin America, in the last 3 to 5 years, we have destroyed 94% of its forest cover, starting with Brazil. In Europe, 24%. In Asia, 45%. And in Africa, 65% of our forest cover. So we are seeing a crisis happen. And why are people deforesting the forests and the rainforest? They say they want to have cattle, they want to have oil palm, they want to have soya bean, they want to grow cocoa, they want to plant rubber, they want to plant wood fiber. Bottom line is, what they are doing is destroying nature. And you can see they are clearly then not 21st century leaders allowing that to happen. They are 19th century science-denying leaders. There is one more thing that happens when you destroy forests. So number one, I told you, it creates air pollution, bigger air pollution. I also told you it enhances the pollution of the burning of fossil fuels like coal, petroleum, etc. The third thing that it does is trees are a very important part of our rain cycle. It is when the trees absorb carbon dioxide, give us oxygen, and the oxygen comes up and links with the hydrogen in the air, we end up with water and rain, H2O. Okay. Now, if we cut all the forests, how will we have oxygen going into the air? What will happen is the temperatures will go up and all the water in the atmosphere will move into the forests, will move into the atmosphere. And when it moves to the atmosphere, what will happen? What will happen is unbelievable precipitation of water into the clouds. What happens when you have unbelievable precipitation of water because of the heat? Simple physics. You heat something, the water will precipitate. So all this water is from the groundwater, atmospheric water, is moving up to the clouds. So what happens when you do that? You will end up with very heavy clouds. And then when it rains, you're having 6 months rain in 1 hour. Why? All the water has gone up to the atmosphere. So another thing that is happening with global warming and deforestation is that all the water in the atmosphere is getting moved up to the sky and the clouds. And now we have floods everywhere. 80% of the extreme weather incidents of the world are flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, all to do with heating the planet and destroying our natural habitat. So what will happen if we keep destroying our natural habitat? The next problem we are going to have is we will not have water. We will not have fresh water. Why? The water is going to be less and less as we destroy our natural habitat. So they say that by 2025, according to the Aqueduct, which is the scientific way of managing and giving us research about the water stress in the world, we can see that the southern hemisphere countries will all have physical and economic water scarcity from 2025 as soon as we cross 1.5 degrees centigrade in terms of global temperatures, and we are at 1.2 now. So in the next 3 years, we are going to cross 1.5. And the moment that happens, now you can see how there's going to be a water stress problem. And if there's a water stress problem, the next thing that will happen is also you will have another major crisis because the world will go to war for water. Because majority of the world's conflicts have happened because of what I call shortage of water. And now we are basically creating our own water scarcity problem that will finally attack and come and haunt us. And people in the southern hemisphere are going to be affected by this more than the people in the northern hemisphere. And when that happens, what will you have? You will have environmental refugees. They will move from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere where there's some water, because you can live without anything in the world, but you cannot live without water because 90% of our physical state is made up of water. So understand that we are now facing an unbelievable climate emergency because we are destroying nature in the form of air pollution, in the form of water stress and shortages, and these are going to now lead to global conflicts. And the most vulnerable people in the world are in the southern hemisphere. The most populated countries in the world are what? China, India. Both these countries are in the southern hemisphere, ladies, Michael. So now we are going to see an unbelievable crisis going to happen with water scarcity. And they say by 2040, which is not far away, most of the Arctic ice would have melted. And when the Arctic ice melts, our freshwater resource is melting, number one. And number two, what else? Sea levels will rise. And when sea levels rise, that is how you're going to have a massive economic devastation in the world. And that is going to come and hit us very soon. So I can tell you from 3000 BC to 2021, the world has had conflicts based on water shortages. Okay, global conflicts. And these conflicts will emerge and will increase. And the whole world will begin to see that water crisis is contributing to the global conflicts. Mark my words that I said it today on the 2nd of October, 2021, in our session on health and social emergency. From 2025, majority of the world's conflicts will be fought for water, and not for oil, not for petroleum, not for diesel, not for gas. They will be fighting for the water, fresh water of the world, because fresh water is only 3% of the world's available water resources. Okay, so that is what we are going to see happening in the future as we speak. And one of the problems of no water is you will not have agriculture. 70% of the world's fresh water goes for agriculture. Okay, so now think about it. No agriculture means no food. No water means you can't survive. And this is another catastrophe of the climate emergency that we are forgetting is going to happen in the world. Okay, so Michael, we are talking of a massive crisis waiting to happen to us, and this crisis is going to come and haunt us big time in the world today. So now I have given you a big story about nature, water crisis, air pollution, pandemics, and I have now shown you how every one of these things are connected, and only an ignorant 19th century leader who is ignoring science will allow this to happen and not do something about it. Who will say, forget this, I am not bothered about all this, I am going forward. You understand?
Thank you.
And that is what we are happening. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much for explaining about the deforestation and its connection to pandemics. Could you let us know about toxic waste and the industrial pollution connection?
Okay, so toxic waste, agricultural waste, food waste, and plastic pollution are the next four big areas. And what we have to understand is that toxic waste is waste emitted by companies into the Earth's atmosphere and into the Earth's land without protecting the people from that waste. And so many companies are doing that, industrial pollution. So sometimes you go to a river and the river is looking green. The river is looking green, right? Why? The rivers are not green, the rivers are blue. Why did it become green? Because you have released toxic waste into the water and polluted it. When when the paint industry and these people release these things into the air, into the water, all the fish in that water will die because they can't breathe, because the oxygen in the water has gone away. So that is toxic and industrial pollution. And you also know that the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry, are one of the biggest polluters in the world in terms of toxic waste. And you must understand that toxic waste is going to hit every single one of us in the world in the future. And we have to realize that companies who do this, there is a principle called polluter pays principle. They must, number one, stop polluting. Number two, if they pollute, they must pay for the pollution, cleaning, and they must pay for every single person who is polluting the world in terms of industry. The second kind of waste we have is agricultural waste. Now, I told you a little earlier that agriculture, that people are destroying forests to grow agriculture crops, and I told you the names, because there is a food shortage. Now I can tell you there is no food shortage. There is a food waste problem. 50% of all the agriculture that we have is coming from food waste, and food waste is the problem that we are having in the world today. And as a result of the food waste, we are now wasting 40% of almost all the food waste that we grow. Just imagine putting so much of water into the producing agriculture, then throwing it into the dustbin, right? That is a crime. Do you know how much water goes into producing 1 kilo of rice?
No.
2,500 liters.
Wow.
1 kilo of rice. To make one sandwich, do you know how much water we need? 165 liters of water. To make the bread, to make the ham, to make the chicken, make the whatever. So basically, agriculture uses a great part of the water in the world. Okay. Now, if there is a water crisis, how will you have agriculture? Right? Right. And this is something that you have to take into account. Take into account as we do this. And please understand that the world is facing a massive agricultural waste problem. And while there are people in Africa and people in South Asia who are struggling to eat one meal, in the Northern Hemisphere, we are throwing food into the dustbin even before it comes to the plate because there's too much of it. And this is the kind of unbelievable waste that we are having in the world today. Okay? A level of waste that is unprecedented. And this unprecedented waste is something that we cannot put up with because the world is happy to let the waste happen. And without fixing the waste problem in agricultural supply chains, we are trying to cut down the few forests that are left. I already said 80% of the forests have been destroyed. Without sorting the waste problem, we are cutting down more forest cover. So to me, these are 18th and 19th century leaders doing this. Okay. So food waste is a problem. And food waste is a massive global challenge that we are facing. And if we continue to have agricultural and food waste, even at consumption, we are wasting about 30% of the food. So we buy more food that we need, then it gets expired, or we forget to eat it in time, or we forget to store it properly, then we throw it in the dustbin. But what people don't realize is to make every kilo of food, we are putting thousands and thousands of liters of water. And when we just throw it into the dustbin, we are basically throwing water away indirectly. Okay? So food waste then is another huge problem in the world. And we need to understand that food waste is going to come and hit us. And the other big problem is that if we have no fresh water, how are we going to have any chance of managing this crisis in the future, right? So toxic waste is industrial waste. And recently you saw toxic waste hit even our country when the couple of those oil containers broke down and released all the polluted fossil fuels into the oceans. So that is toxic waste finally, because it's going to come and hit the environment directly or indirectly. And that's another good reason to stop burning fossil fuels and shipping fossil fuels all around the world, because the amount of fossil fuel accidents that have happened in the transportation of fossil fuels by now is unprecedented. The Exxon Valdez, where the Exxon Mobil released all their petroleum into the Valdez, and similarly Shell in Nigeria, and recently the oil companies that release the oil in our part of the world. So another reason to exit fossil fuels is that agriculture waste is a catastrophic waste in the world. 40% of everything we make and grow, after putting billions of tons of water, is thrown into the dustbin, because even before it comes to the plate, because it is lost in transit, lost in the supply chain itself. Okay, so remember, this is the reality of the world. Okay, and toxic waste, if you have 21st century leaders leading those companies, will not allow toxic waste. They will say, we will not make anything and put it, and if there is a waste product, we will protect that waste product from harming the environment and harming people. But because we have 19th century leaders running businesses, they don't care about what the hell happens. They're happy to throw the waste into the atmosphere, into the dustbin, or into the sand. Okay. Then agricultural waste is because we don't have the kind of supply chains to make sure that where we grow the product, you have to take it from there and transport it to where we consume the product. In between, if we don't have proper supply chains in cold chains to look after the transit, we will destroy it before it comes to the consumer. And this is what is happening with supply chains in the world and in the food waste and consumption. So I have given you quite a lot of details on the issue of waste management and the lack of 21st century leaders. Because if they understood the science, and if they had an urgency for the climate emergency, they won't let any of these 5 things happen. They won't deforest. They won't let air pollution hit us and hit our health. They won't let toxic waste, agricultural waste, and food waste at consumption hit us directly or indirectly. So I hope I have given you a summary of these issues. And I think we have one more waste to look at.
Yes, the plastic waste.
Excellent. So now let me start by telling you that the plastic waste problem in the world is so big today that in the Pacific Ocean, we now have what is known as the Great Pacific Patch of Plastic Islands. We now have a big island created with plastic waste in the Pacific Ocean. And the amount of pollution that is happening with plastic is unbelievable in the world today. Unbelievable. And this is creating an unprecedented problem by the use of single-use plastics. Okay? So do you know how long it takes for a plastic bottle, a single-use bottle, like a Coca-Cola bottle, a 1 liter bottle, or a Pepsi-Cola 1 liter bottle, or Elephant House ginger beer 1 liter bottle, or whatever 1 liter bottle? Do you know how long it takes for it to biodegrade? Do you know how many years?
Probably around 200 plus years.
Exactly. So majority of these take up to 500 years. So now, if you put things into the planet after using it once, and it takes 500 years to disintegrate, what you're causing is a plastic pollution. So the important point I want to make about plastic pollution is today, plastic pollution is contributing to almost 40-50%, 20 to 30% of all the landfills in the world, 20 to 30%. And if you look at this problem very closely, there are about 10 companies in the world contributing to almost 80 to 90% of the plastic pollution. So who are these companies? Let's name them first. Number one, the worst plastic polluter on the planet with single-use plastics is two American companies at number 1 and 2 position. And actually out of the polluting 8 companies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are from the USA. So which also tells us that the USA's business leaders are 19th century, 18th century leaders who don't respect science and who don't understand the urgency for the climate emergency. So what are these companies? Number 1 is Coca-Cola Company, the biggest plastic polluter in the world, and it accounts for almost 50% of the world's plastic pollution. Who is number 2? Pepsi-Cola, also from the USA. Who is number 3? A Swiss company called Nestle. Who is number 4? Danone. Number 5, Procter & Gamble in the USA. Number 6 is Unilever, which is a company we all know. Number 7 is Colgate-Palmolive, and number 8 is Mars. We know Mars for chocolates. Right. These are the 8 biggest plastic polluters in the world, and the biggest 3 are Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and Nestle. Now, if you and I want to be responsible citizens of this world, then we have to stop buying these products if we want to stop the plastic pollution problem of the world. We have to insist to these companies, we are not buying anything single-use plastics you put in the market. You move back into glass, like the glass bottles Coca-Cola used to have. Go into aluminum canisters. Go into Tetra packaging, better than plastic single use. Why aren't they doing that? Because they have put profit before the planet. They have put profit before the planet. That is why Coca-Cola Company moved all its production from glass bottles into plastic pollution, because they don't care the amount of pollution they create on the planet. So these are the companies that are the biggest polluters. Now let me tell you, who are the plastic producers? Because you can't pollute unless somebody produces them. Yes? So who are the plastic producers? Number 1 plastic producer in the world is ExxonMobil, which is an oil company. So plastic, as you know, is made as a byproduct from petroleum. So if you stop burning fossil fuels, you will also stop the plastic industry one shot. Okay? The number 1 plastic single-use producer is ExxonMobil. Number 2 is a company called Dow Chemicals. Number 3 is Sinopec of China. Number 4 is Indorama. And number 5 is PetroChina and Reliance India and Leon Basil. And there's also a company in South America, Soljet. So these are the 8 biggest plastic producers, single-use plastic producers. So what are the countries that are part of the problem? Because at the end of the day, for there to be such a problem, somebody has to make it, and I have given you the 8 companies to make it. Some companies have to use it, and the Coca-Colas and Pepsi-Colas and Nestle's and Danones and Unilevers and Colgates are using it. So what countries are the biggest contributors to the plastic pollution? So let me give you the countries. The plastic pollution problem in terms of waste in the oceans, the number 1 contributor to this is China. Number 2 contributor to the plastic problem in the ocean is Indonesia. Number 3 is Philippines. Number 4 is Vietnam. Number 5 is Sri Lanka. Number 6 is Egypt. Number 7 is Thailand. Number 8 is Malaysia. Number 9 is Nigeria. Number 10 is Bangladesh. Number 11 is Brazil. And number 12 is United States of America. Now, you can see who is polluting the oceans and creating the Great Pacific Ocean patch. What are the countries that have the biggest single-use plastic pollution in the land? Australia is number 1. Number 2 is United States of America. Number 3 is South Korea. Number 4 is United Kingdom. Number 5 is Japan. Number 6 is France. Number 7 is Spain. Number 8 is Germany. Number 9 is China. And number 10 is India. So I have given you a list of the countries which are polluting the oceans, and Sri Lanka is number 5 in that. I have also given you the countries which are generating the most amount of single-use plastics. Number 1 country is none other than Australia. I already started by telling you Steve Morrison is a 19th century leader who is destroying the planet by burning coal. Now you can see he's also destroying the planet by being the biggest country generating single-use plastics. So now you can see why it is that I'm talking about 21st century leadership. Because of the absence of 21st century leadership is why we have a problem. So now I can tell you another factor about plastic pollution. 81% of the rivers in Asia are today blocked with plastic pollution. 81% of Asian rivers. Right. Number 2, 8% of African rivers, 5.5% of South American rivers, and about 4.5% of North and Central American rivers. In Europe, it's only 0.6%. So the top 5 plastic emitting rivers are starting with in Thailand and India and Malaysia, and these are the countries that are contributing to the plastic pollution of the world, including the Philippines. So I have given you now a lot of facts and data about plastic pollution. And what I want to say is, if you have plastic pollution in a country, that is going to come and haunt us in terms of ocean pollution and also going to not biodegrade for a long time. So what can anyone watching this program do? Number 1, say no to any of these companies buying any product from these companies if they are contributing to single-use plastic pollution. Go to those companies, buy aluminum cans, buy Tetra Paks, or buy glass bottles, and tell them, we will not buy single-use plastics from you. We like your products, but if you don't put it in the right packaging, we will not use it. That is what we have to do. You understand? That is what we have to do in terms of the future. Now, I want to now say something about the health emergency that the world is facing today, COVID-19. So, do you know what are the 3 countries with the most number of COVID-19 deaths? Do you know what they are, Michael?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, USA, India, and Russia.
USA, India, Brazil, India, and Russia. Number 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, from everything I have told you up till now, you can already see who are the leaders running those countries. The man who ran America during the COVID crisis was Donald Trump. The man who runs Brazil today, which is the second largest deaths for COVID-19, is Bolsonaro. The man who's running India is Modi, and the man who's running Russia is Putin. What is common about these 4 people, from what I have told you already, from the 4 traits of 21st century leaders? What is missing in those guys?
Probably leadership.
They are all basically science denying 19th century leaders. That is what is the common factor about those 4 people. And the world is full of 19th century leaders who are ignoring the science. If you remember, during the Trump regime, how the guy was denying even Dr. Fauci, who is the advisor to the American government on managing the COVID crisis, he ignored him and insulted him. Same happens in Brazil. The Brazilian Prime Minister, Bolsonaro Chainsaw, has fired three ministers of health because they didn't want to do the foolish things that he wanted to do. No need to wear a mask, etc., etc., etc. And the same has happened in India, where India opened up the country way before it should have opened up without managing the crisis and vaccinating the people. So the key point I want to make is, if you have a 19th century science-denying leader at the top, that will directly contribute to death of its people due to ignoring the science and the health emergency. Do you see how serious the problem is? Yeah?
Yes.
In terms of a health emergency. So if we want to manage COVID and future pandemics, one way to do that is to get rid of the leaders who are running these countries, who are science deniers, 19th century science deniers, and replacing them with 21st century leaders. Yeah? So I can tell you today, the top 10 countries for COVID deaths, as at the very recently, are US number 1, Brazil coming up very close number 2, India number 3, Mexico number 4, Peru number 5, Russia number 6, United Kingdom number 7, Italy number 8, Indonesia number 9, Colombia number 10, France number 11, Argentina number 12, and Iran number 13. I can tell you, majority of these countries are led by, except for USA now, which has a 21st century leader in Biden. I think most of these other countries are led by 18th, 19th century science denying leaders. And that is the common factor about all these leaders. Yeah. And this is the reality in the future. And I can tell you, pandemics will rise as we destroy nature. If pandemics will rise, more and more people, we will see the world is shutting down very often, because today people are traveling all over the world. The world is connected. The only way to stop pandemics is to stop the world being connected. And you cannot stop the world being connected, right? So the health emergency is going to be with us for many, many centuries to come. And unless we replace all these 18th, 19th century science-denying leaders with 21st century leaders. So I have given you a very broad, detailed analysis of the health emergency the world is faced with, and shown you how it is directly connected to nature and how it's directly connected to burning fossil fuels, and how burning coal and burning petroleum and diesel is directly contributing to the health emergency of the world, and how deforestation is directly contributing to the pandemics of the world. So I have given you a very detailed story about health emergency, and I hope now you know why the health emergency is how big it is today. Yeah.
Great. So thank you for explaining about the health emergency. And if there's a connection, if you could let us know the connection between the health and social emergency, and if you could say something about social inequality in the world.
Excellent. So this particular module, we call it health and social emergency. The reason I have done that is because it is when we ignore the health emergency and we ignore the climate emergency, you will end up with health and climate emergencies, which then contribute to the social emergency. So what is the connection? If there's a health emergency and the breadwinner of the house dies, you have now created a social emergency. If the breadwinner of the house and those who bring money to the home are ill and they cannot go to work, you now create an economic emergency, right? Social emergency and an economic emergency. So these emergencies, Michael, are all very closely linked. You cannot say, I will attack the economic emergency and ignore the health emergency, the climate emergency, Because when you do that, you create a social emergency, and the social emergency creates an economic emergency. So let's talk a little about the world today in terms of social emergency. So the first important point I want to make to you today is about the world's inequality. Now, I told you, if you have triple bottom line leaders, you won't have a situation where 1% of the world owns 52% of the world's assets. In fact, there are 3 to 4 people in the world who are richer than 50% of the world's population. 4 people. Now, that is what you call wealth inequality. And the 1% of the world are struggling to survive when, 1% of the world are living a life that is maybe so way out of the planet that the 99% are struggling to survive every day. Trying to figure out, how will I survive today? How will I earn some money today? How will I live today? While 99% are throwing all their wealth into the dustbin sometimes by simply wasting and controlling the world. So here are some of the important statistics that are important. Number one, 0.7% of the world, 0.7% of the world, not even 1%, are controlling 45.2% of the world's economy and are basically millionaires and billionaires. 0.7%. Then for that, you can add another 7.4%, which are earning over 100,000 US dollars a month or $1 million. And when you add the two, you have 8.1% of the world's population, which basically control 80% of the world's wealth. Nearly 8% of the population. One way to remember this is 8% of the population of the world control 80% of the world's wealth. That means 92% have only 20% of the world's wealth left to survive. And that is a very, very unfair figure. If you had triple bottom line 21st century leaders, this will never happen. Because they have not bothered about the word social progress. They have been only bothered about wealth creation. So then you have a 71% of the world's population earning less than $10,000 a year and as a family, and they only control 3% of the world's wealth. So 80% of the world's wealth is looked after by 8%. 71% is looked after, is only having 3% of the world's wealth. And this is the social inequality of the world today. That is why the world is saying 1% have 52%, the 8% have 80%, the rest of the world is struggling to live, struggling to survive. And this is what you call social inequality in the world today. And the sad thing is, we have not had too many leaders who have tried to fix this problem. In fact, what is happening in the last 20 years is the problem is getting worse. And the COVID-19 has created another problem with wealth. Because do you think the 8% of the world who have 82% of the world's wealth are affected by COVID-19? Not so much. Because they can afford to buy the vaccines, they can afford to live in isolation, they can go to a desert island and live there and not meet any people. They can get on a spaceship and leave the planet and go to Mars or go to the moon. But the 80% of the world's population can't do that. So they are suffering and dying like flies. And you can see the fact that America, which we used to think is the most developed country in the world, has the highest number of COVID deaths What is it telling you about inequality? Because the majority of people dying in America are people from the colored community and the Latinos and the black community, who are the poor people who cannot fight the health emergency. Right? So inequality leads to social emergencies. Inequality leads to health emergencies. Inequality leads to hunger. And if there is no food to eat and no money to buy the medicine, and you can't go for your daily work, you are now in big trouble, right? So the world's leaders have ignored the social and health emergency because they are 19th century, 18th century leaders who don't appreciate the science and who don't appreciate facts and data. So this is telling you something about the health emergency, the health social emergencies of the world.
Great. Thank you very much for explaining that, Dr. Fernando. And lastly, it's about encouraging social progress of employees and communities. If you could brief us on that.
Yes, yes. Now, one of the biggest, what I call lies in the world today is a lie called CSR, corporate social responsibility. Companies are putting a lot of money into corporate social responsibility. And I can tell you, for every $1 they spend on corporate social responsibility, they spend about $100 on media coverage of social CSR projects, because they want the world to think they are doing good. And basically, we call it doing good to look good. Doing good to look good. Lots of companies do this. And I am a person who believes that the word CSR should be banned in the world, because CSR has given companies a chance to hide by not doing the right thing, but doing some unrelated thing and putting a lot of money and telling people about the little they do as opposed to the proper thing they do. Okay. So now, what should companies do? Should companies go and start doing CSR activities? Or should companies first look after their employees? I think the first responsibility of a company is to make sure their employees are doing well, that they are educating their employees of the climate emergency, they're educating their employees of the health emergency, they're providing their employees with the vaccines needed, with the health needed, with the money needed to survive. You know, there is a famous saying which says, before you try to save the neighbors, first save yourself, right? Before you start doing things for the neighbors, first save yourself. Every company should practice that. I believe the first responsibility of a company is to uplift the inequality and reduce the inequality in their company between the income their directors are getting and the income their lowest paid employee is getting. Reduce that inequality, eliminate it. Because that inequality, if a company is happily thriving on, what is the point? Sometimes the CEO of the company is getting about 5,000 times more than the worst paid employee in the company, and getting share options, bonuses, profit shares, while the poor people are working hard and getting nothing. So my message to all company leaders is, before you start trying to save your neighbors and doing CSR, basically putting money to tell the people we do a lot of good, doing good to look good, first look after your employees. Educate them about sustainability. Give them loans to go into solar power. Give them loans to sort out their water problems. Give them money and tell them to reforest, grow a vegetable garden. Give them money to move into electric vehicles, to hybrid vehicles. Once they do that and get the inequality between the topmost employee and the CEO and the lowest paid employee, and they have minimized that, from this crazy gap to a small gap, then you can start doing things outside of the company. Before you first look after your employees, stop the word CSR, eliminate the word CSR. I would say every company in the world should be looking at social sustainability. Social sustainability starts with your own employees and their families. Till you get that right, stop making a fool of your company by doing things here, there, and everywhere. First, fix the employees first. Number two, once you have done that, ask the question, where is my company operating? Where do I have a factory? Where do I have a warehouse? Where do I have operations? Where do I have an office? After you have sorted your employees, then only start doing things in the community where you are operating. Look at the people near your factory. Do something for those people. Don't pollute for a start. Support those people, number two. Where you have a factory, where you have a plantation, where you have an office. Look at the people around you. Look at a radius of about 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers from that office, and do something in the communities that you operate. So my message to all company leaders and business leaders is, eliminate the word CSR from your lingo. Stop publishing doing good to look good CSR reports. Start talking about what you're doing to uplift and minimize the inequality between your employees and your highest paid manager. Then start doing things in the communities where you operate. Before you start doing those two things, don't start doing doing good to look good activities. And one way to know that that company is basically doing good to look good is by asking the question, is that leader a 19th century leader or is he a 21st century leader? 19th century leaders will go with CSR and do good to look good. 21st century leaders will say, no, I need to reduce the inequality in my company. I need to support our people in our company to live sustainable lifestyles. We are going to give them support to live sustainable lifestyles, to move into solar energy, to move into wind energy. We are going to support them, and we are going to support them moving to sustainable transportation. And those companies which are providing transport to their employees, the question is, are those vehicles diesel vehicles, petrol vehicles, or are they hybrid vehicles, or are these vehicles basically sustainable transport? So don't give unsustainable transport to the company's employees. First fix that before you start talking about your social sustainability strategy. So drop the word CSR, attack the word social sustainability, starting with your employees to live sustainable lifestyles. And once you have done that properly, then only move into the communities in which you operate, not everywhere else. Yeah. And that is, to me, the mark of a 21st century leader, Michael.
Great. So, Dr. Fernando, thank you so much for your time. And thanks a lot for explaining on our second episode, the health and social emergency. So thank you very much. And we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And be a 21st century leader.